Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Grow Your Tutoring Business. Today is slightly different. We're not really talking too much about growing your business, although I'm sure there will be elements that I can relate back to your business and why it's important that what's happened over the last couple of days in Paris. So for those of you who didn't see or haven't spoken to yet, with the TTA, we got invited to something in UNESCO at UNESCO headquarters in Paris, which was a little bit strange, or felt quite strange. It was it felt like conference, although we kind of knew it wasn't an actual conference in what we would consider a traditional sense. It's like a coming together of people, bodies of which we didn't know who, and we're going to be talking about the tuition industry, the tuition sector, but on a global scale. Now, we know it was about supplementary tuition. Supplementary tuition is that lives alongside the mainstream, education, but we could say core education, because really we're looking at English, maths and science. Now, we didn't really talk much about those subjects in particular. It was more about the impacts of supplementary tuition on governments, the impact on families, and the impact on children and young people. It was a tough gig, and I think possibly John Nichols as well, but I'm certainly coming back with a renewed appreciation on the system in the UK that we use in general. Like, for example, the curriculum. And I'm not a fan of the national curriculum at all, particularly at the primary level. I don't know too much about the Key Stage 3 version. I don't need to, I've never needed to know that, so it's not something I'm an expert on. But in the primary level, it's very squished, often squished with things that mean we have to rush our children, and particularly the younger children, through some certain aspects of their learning where actually there's no need to. If we had a sensible look at the curriculum, it wouldn't take long to pull out the pieces of the jigsaw and move them around a little bit just to make it work a little bit better. Anyway, we also have a system in the UK and in probably more Western cultures, Western countries, of quite a solid teaching qualification. And therefore, what happens is when we start looking at supplementary tuition, we've got highly skilled and usually highly experienced people then delivering the supplementary tuition. So even though there is still a stigma in the UK around having a tutor, and I've spoken about this before, particularly since going to China and coming back, and that whole, like, over there in China, if you don't have a tutor, you are the strange one, or you're considered that you don't care about your children and their future and the prospects, etc. In the UK, it's kind of like the flip side. It's a bit like, well, if you have a tutor, it's like, well, your children's stupid, they need lots of help. And so that's changing. We are recognizing the need for either extracurricular or some kind of extra support along the way, and whatever that may look like. That could be because your child's a high flyer and they need a push, and we're not being able to meet that need in school. It could be that your child is behind where they should be at a certain age. Yeah, we open up the door on whether we should be having this kind of ranking system anyway, but it's essentially the thing that we live in. So if your child is behind, we say, well, we'll catch them up, and lots of us will start doing either one or the other, kind of high stakes exams, remedial catch up, that kind of thing. Right, that's pretty much the norm. We live in a certain space where these things are protected, so if you're a teacher, you can't just become a teacher. It's a protected job, which means you get a degree. There are certain even GCSEs that you have to have before you can actually just go through that process. Now, what happens on the other side of that for the supplementary teaching, it just means we have these amazingly skilled and highly experienced, in most cases, people ready just to pick up and or pick up the children, pick up the young people, and just help them move forward. Right, that's the space in the UK is like that now. Let's just pause for a minute and just acknowledge the fact that there will be some people who do not do that, and they don't have those teaching qualifications, and it's an unregulated market, which means anybody can be a tutor just by saying they are a tutor. Doesn't necessarily mean they do have the relevant skills, but it also doesn't mean that they don't. And through self-regulation, I'm not even talking about the TTA. I'm just talking about the fact that if your business is good, if you're able to deliver what you deliver, what you say you can deliver, your business is likely to grow. And that's the same in any open market, whichever industry you want to choose. And if you're not very good, it's not likely to take off. And I think that's what I'm talking about, self-regulation. If we layer this up with having a body of some sort, like the TTA, where we can lobby governments, we can become the go-to body for that, what we now consider kind of more legislative, although I'm using that term very loosely, body, where someone can come and say, right, this has happened, what do I do? And so we can provide, we don't do it ourselves, but essentially there is like a legal helpline and also lots of training and CPD to just support the general keeping the levels high is what I'm talking about, and not letting anything slip. And when we get into the UNESCO conversations that we've had, it's really felt that in the UK we have an amazing system of self-regulation, whether it's because it's the market that it operates in, or whether it's because we have bodies like the TTA to provide that level. Well, John calls it a minimum level of regulation or guidelines, right? So we want people to, as a minimum, be DBS checked. That's a TTA stance, because that's safeguarding. And if you, as a football coach or a tennis coach or a swimming coach working with groups of young children, you need to have a DBS check. That's required. But yet in the tuition industry in the UK, it's not. So we're lobbying for that to happen. There's also the disqualified and barred list from teaching as well. We believe that should also become a minimum standard. So it's all about keeping standards at a minimum level. Now, through self-regulation and having people like the TTA, that kind of happens, whether you are a member of a body or not, because these things exist, it kind of creates like almost like an imaginary line at the moment. We don't want it to be an imaginary line, but it's there. This is what we expect people to do. Okay, so that's the TTA self-regulation. The reality is, around the world, it's not like that at all. And therefore, it creates a big problem at government level. And there were issues that I suppose I'd never really had to consider before, because I don't work at that level, I suppose. But also, it's not the system we use in the UK. And the problem being, I mean, I haven't spoken too much about China yet, because I know there'll be more coming out about that. Lots of people are sharing like their stories at the moment, and I'll have a turn at some point. In China, we learned about the double reduction, which was about realistically looking at how much work children were being given at school, and then through tuition, and then asking and then legislating that you're not allowed to do that anymore. We're not going to have this supplementary tuition going on. So they outlawed it. Well, you wasn't allowed to do it. And there were some huge businesses, and we're talking businesses that were worth billions of US dollars, gone overnight. Or in I suppose the best outcome for the businesses was that it was wiped, but they still existed. So there was no longer worth 2 billion US dollars anymore. I was still worth quite a lot of money, but their share price was completely wiped. And so businesses disappeared because they just couldn't do what they were previously doing. And so, because at government level, what they found was that the supplementary tuition market in China was putting too much stress on families financially, and too much stress on the children, and the well-being was suffering. And rather than using tuition as a tool to lower anxiety and increase confidence, actually the opposite was happening. It was too extreme. And so we had an extreme response. Now, that was kind of being used as the model at UNESCO. And so there was a big Chinese delegation there. And they didn't really, the main lady didn't really talk until the second day. So on the first day, we heard just from like educational ministries from different countries. We heard from university lecturers, people who had like skin in the game from research point of view, and had lots to say around like the impact of tuition, but it was very negative. And I mean, I'm being quite kind there, as in it was confrontational. There was an element that tuition was the enemy, and that no good can come from tuition. You know, there wasn't any positives to it. It was this thing that would it highlights the weakness of an educational system, and that's not good for government. And as a result of that, governments are ignoring it. They're ignoring what they were calling in the UNESCO headquarters as the shadow education, living in the shadow of the mainstream. And actually, what I was actually talking about was confronting this shadow education, which is just very, oh, it's just the wrong words to use in the case of the UK, where we don't view it in that way. Or I might be overstating that because we've grown an audience that is pretty much an echo chamber. We all feel at least like-minded enough to either be listening to this or watching this, depending on how you consume this piece of information. And so it's likely that, one, you are a good teacher, whether you're a qualified one or not, that you're good at your job and you're passionate for it. You're passionate to create a positive outcome for a child or young person. You know, that's at the heart of why you do what you do. This is not replicated in other countries. The reason why some of these companies exist in Nigeria, in South Africa, in China was about profit, and profit at all costs. And so therefore we were like reducing costs in the labor, which meant that we weren't employing qualified teachers. Therefore there was a big skill gap, which was spoken about a lot, that actually there was people over promising and under delivering, which meant that financial strain on families was really increased, which then in turn, I mean, look, I mean, this is like the knock-on effect would be economy, would be high anxiety, these children working 10 hours a week on lessons, but then making no impact on their educational life at all. And so all outcomes are negative. I mean, I'm super positive about tuition. And there was times I wanted to get up and just like shout from the rooftops that, you know, I want to defend the tuition industry, because it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be this negative spiral into the downgrading of education, the downgrading of an economy, even because money is being ripped out of the economy, out of families' pockets, literally. It did loosen, and I think what happened was there were some stakeholders in the room that were representative of the tuition industry. So there was myself and John Nichols from the TTA. There was Mohan Dal from the Australian Teaching Association, which is amazing to meet him and work with him. There were a Chinese tuition agency, one of the biggest ones in China, who were also in the same kind of market as us. There were teachers there as well, but teachers who tutor. And that was the fascinating thing in the room. There was probably about 40 to 45 delegates. And on the very first morning, Mark Bray, who is a celebrated professor, an author, or everything around this shadow education, he got people to put their hands up and said, right, who in their life had access to tutor? And some hands went up. I'd say about half the room. And then said, okay, now put your hands up if your own children or your niece or your nephew has accessed or is accessing a tutor now. And I'd say it was about 90%. So even those people who were arguing against tuition, fiercely arguing against tuition, were accessing what they were calling the shadow education, which is fascinating, because when you heard these people talk about it, it was so negative. Like they wanted to put a blanket ban on all tuition, like it was just going to wipe it off the face of the earth, and it never exists. Right, let's move on, because we kind of set the scene for how it was hostile. And it was confrontational, and it was very tricky to navigate that when all you want to do is sing its praises because that's your or my perception of it. Let's actually hear about some of the issues that were brought up, and different educational ministries had different things to say. Some of the professors had a different take on it, but overwhelmingly, what was coming through was a systemic failure of education. Why does I'm going to reframe it to private tuition? I'm not called it shadow education, as I don't like it. Why does private tuition exist? It's a deep question, and I can give some easy answers, but I don't think they're really it. And I think we have to think a lot deeper than this if we're going to put our teacher's hat on. And I was conflicted about this. I'm going to be honest. I said it within 10 minutes. I said to John, I'm really conflicted because my mind is going back to being a teacher and an educator. But I know I'm here under the banner of tuition, and I want to make sure I represent tuition. But my mind was going back to, we need to sort education out. If we really want to eradicate tuition, if that's the real aim of UNESCO and the stakeholders in the room, we can't do that unless we really go back to education and the problems it should be solving. Because there's a gap. There's a gap between what's being taught at school and what children need. Tuition is filling that gap. So that was the overall kind of like feeling with what we were talking about. And day one in particular was very much focused on education. There was a little bit on day two, particularly with these questions where it's like, well, you know, what are the key reasons? What are the motivations? We heard from the head of education in Egypt, who broke down, got rid of all of the anything that stood in Egypt from a curriculum perspective, just ripped it down to nothing, and they rebuilt it from the bottom up with the view to, he said, reduce demand on private tuition. Not as kind as that. He said it in a different way. Eradicate it, get rid. I won't need it anymore because education now is built with all of these things in mind, and we've got all these different packages ready for people just to access for free. And so what they had was that, I can't remember what they call it. I think it's the knowledge bank. They created a knowledge bank. So the education is now completely brand new, written from the bottom up, which means it's got everything that they believe in Egypt they need to have in place, done in a really sensible way. And then even if it's not, they've got this knowledge bank, which everybody can access for free. Think like BBC Bite Size in the UK, but with steroids, it's huge. No need for private tuition at all, because all you do is click a link and then you're going to be taught how to do it through videos, fun videos, and practice. So again, BBC Bite Size. It has not eradicated tuition, and in fact, it's stronger than ever. The perceived need for tuition is still strong. So it achieved nothing, because and this fascinated me from a teaching perspective, because if I bumped into you in the street and said, well, Rich, how do we solve like the mental health crisis? How do we solve the fact that we are hemorrhaging teachers out of education, good, amazing teachers out of education? I would say I would love to get rid of the curriculum that we have now and rebuild it with some key stakeholders who really understand pedagogy, who really understand how children learn at different stages, understand the need not to rush through certain elements of maths or English or science or whatever it may be. Get key stakeholders to do this. But we've just been shown a case where that didn't work, and yet there was still need, or parents perceived the need to find some sort of private tuition for their children. So there's still a motivation for it. The next thing was high stakes. High stakes exams are driving the need or perceived need for private tuition. I think we know this, like that sounds really obvious. Like, when do GCSE tutors get crazy busy? Like, they do their mock exam and suddenly, we're filling up groups. We're working till 9 p.m. We're doing what we can to support, and tuition business gets really, really strong. And then we lose them after 4 months, 5 months, and then we start the process all over again. We know that has that effect. And our conversation, again, this is Grow Your Tutoring Business. So let's talk about how we can start that cycle earlier. How can we talk to our parents early so that we can make a much stronger change and lifelong learners out of these children rather than just trying to help them pass the test. As a long discussions around whether high stakes exams do what they or serve the community, serve our young people, and a really interesting discussion with people around the way we rank our children, A star or grade 9. And then we rank them again, don't we? Like first, 2 1s, 2 2s. And we rank them again when they go to job interview because they do scores, score sheets. And I think it is just the way of the world. And I don't think there's any getting away from that, because no matter what system we use, we're going to have to use something. We can't just make it an open. How would we tell whether we're capable of going to law school or whatever chosen qualification? So there has to be something. And there's no real answers to that, but it was very interesting to talk about that as the impact on the tuition industry, and then the impact on government. Because essentially what we're saying is, and this is why governments have ignored it, is that we're not delivering what the children need at school for them to hit a certain grade that unlocks the next phase of a child's life. If you're in the bottom 30%, you're not going to get access to the next level of education. You have to do access courses. We're going to have to go back and do resits, but you're going to be resitting it with the same information as before, and even probably the same delivery, the same teaching delivery, unless we go out to this innovative market of private tutors who know what they're doing. They're highly trained, they're highly skilled. We know this in the UK. It's exactly what it's like. But that's not the same in other countries. And this is where it really starts to become a problem. Okay, so we've got these sort of different things all coming together. And then we learn a little bit more about China and what's actually happening there. Is it's loosening a little bit. They're understanding that, like, the double reduction, it's played its part in no uncertain terms in kind of getting rid of those companies who were over marketing, taking money and making children work sort of an extra 10, 20 hours a week just to get the results, or not get the results if it was poor teaching. That it doesn't have to be profit driven, although, let's get paid for our expertise. But we're not trying to become multi-millionaires. I don't know. Are we? Probably. I don't know. Maybe not. We do it in an ethical way. That's the whole thing, right? We do it through nurture. We do it in the right way at Tutors Who Thrive. That's what we promote. So they feel like it's been used. It's worked really well. We're looking at tuition and support of families in a completely different way now. We've had to be innovative in China. Otherwise, these companies won't exist. So the smaller companies who were helping families to pass certain tests, and they were just test factories, they've gone. They didn't know how to innovate. They didn't have the skills. But those who did have the skills, those who did have the passion, they were able to look at what families were looking for and needed and solve problems in a different way through enrichment courses, through summer schools, through other ways of making the connection. And hearing this on the second day, there was more of a positive feel. We were able to, and John was absolutely amazing at this on day one. When I've recorded what he was saying, and he was a true advocate, as were anybody in the room who has that vested interest in the industry. Everybody had our backs in there. We felt like we had our backs against the wall at some point. We came out and and we were listened to, and the mood did change. So on the second day, to hear that actually China are loosening up, I'm not saying they're getting rid of double reduction, because they probably won't, but there is a little bit more wriggle room and a little bit more freedom. We just don't want test factories, and that's the same in the UK too. We don't want to just teach someone to pass a test. We want them to have lifelong skills that they can take into sort of adulthood and society. And we heard from someone called Ville, who runs a teacher training company in Belgium, and also been a tutor, run tuition agencies, tuition businesses all across the world. And so it was fascinating to hear her talk. She was just saying about how like bringing together the skills around character building. And there's actually a university course on this. It's not character building, it's character education. I took a picture of it because it fascinated me. It's something which I've been mulling over for quite a while, where I'd really love to help young people look at education in a slightly different way, where we're looking at it's very skills based. And I'm not talking about doing vocational skills. What I'm talking about is people skills, personality, talking about communication, breaking that down into its different sections and saying, actually, what does this look like? What is needed when you leave university? You can leave university with a first, but you can't enter the workplace because you can't get past the first stage of an interview. What's the point of all of that if you can't then go and use that skill and knowledge that you've just spent your whole life up to that point learning? It's unusable in the workplace because you don't have the right skills in place to access them, and for your potential employees to access them as well. So it was really interesting to hear her side of it as well. I think overall there were movements in the way that it was perceived, or it could be perceived. I know John is really excited about the policy side of it because we're able to draft up what's happening in the UK and actually show it to our colleagues across the globe and say, look, self-regulation works. We can come and help you set up your self-regulation systems. Tuition doesn't have to be this enemy of the state. It can be the solution to a lot of the problems that you're facing. Whatever system that you use in school, whatever systems that we would create in the UK, there will always be gaps because you cannot fill every single problem for every single person. It's just impossible to do. But we can do it in that innovative way, whether that is like the NTP that we've just gone through over the last few years, looking at had its issues. Let's not pretend it was perfect because it wasn't. It's probably 50 to 60% okay. And the rest, eyes rolling and thinking, if we had somebody sensible rolled it out, and a different way to get into the contracts. And I don't want to like badmouth too much, but there would have been a smoother way of doing this. Could have been a smoother way of doing this. It would have been a lot more successful, and I think it was a huge success. And again, we lead the way with that in the UK, but when we learn from the mistakes, so hopefully, but it can be done at government level. It doesn't have to be this thing that just sits outside in the shadows. It can be this thing that can be brought in and we work together as partners. I'll leave you with the voice of Mohan from the Australian Tutors Association, who kicked us off on day 2 with what I considered a rousing speech, but it was very confrontational. And we were confronted as a tuition industry with this book that was called Confronting the Shadow Education. And Mohan's opening words were, why use the word confronting? Why are we going down this aggressive route? Why are we not saying, again, let's react to the shadow education? Why are we not saying embrace the shadow education? Because we have a choice. We can look at it and reject it. We can look at it and ignore it. We can look at it and ban it, or we can look at it and see it as a solution. The solution's in front of us globally, and the UK has a part to play in this change of the view. So they're my big takeaways from the 2 days. There's more, and I've got pages of notes, people I'd love to follow up with. I've met some amazing people who have just really helped shaped my mind around tuition on a more global scale. And it was one of those moments in my life where I hopefully will look back and go, that was, at the moment, it feels quite monumental to be involved at that level and to be heard at that level too. And I really hope that we're able to shape what happens around the world in a really positive way, and we can impact governments and societies of people, and hopefully have associations as well in these places, which could help self-regulate the tuition industry into a very positive, solution-focused system. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I'd like, if you have any questions on this, please reach out to me, either in the Facebook group, you can message me and put comments on Spotify and on YouTube too. So whether you're watching, that would be lovely. If you have anything to add, anything to say, I'm all ears. Okay, everybody. I'll speak to you all soon. I'll see you later.